Welcome back, everybody, to Magic with Randy. I am Randy, and today we're breaking down the standard metagame from this past weekend. Now, there's been a lot of things going on. We had a bunch of different challenges going on Magic the Gathering Online, as well as the first ever Spotlight challenge going on as well. We had some re-CQs going down there. We had a whole bunch of stuff just going on this weekend. Standard has been popping off this weekend, to say the least, or this past weekend, to say the least. But as always, guys, before we get into it, and really get into the meat and potatoes of this last weekend. If you like what you're seeing, you like what I'm doing, go ahead and leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out, and let me know what you guys are playing in standard, as well as what you guys think is going to be popping up here in the new in the RCQs coming up. With that out of the way, let's get into the first standard challenge we had on Friday. Now, you'll notice this is the first time, I think, since I've started doing this, that Dimir is not the most played deck in one of these challenges, or the most played deck in the top 32. Esper Bounce is the new hotness, essentially. I kind of had a breakout weekend last weekend where people started playing it, started putting up real numbers, and then this weekend it just continued to capitalize on that whole thing. So, we had 6 Esper Bounce decks in this. We had 6 Gruul aggro list, 4 Jeskai Convoke, 3 Golgari midrange, and 3 Dimir midrange. That is huge from what we've seen before as a whole. Between Golgari and Dimir, usually we're putting up a lot bigger numbers. Golgari starting to definitely fall off as a whole, but seeing Dimir being only 3 copies in the top 32 is wild. And then of course we had the Azorius Tempo. That's a deck that's starting to pop up again. That's the Azorius Oculus deck, essentially the kind of reanimator strategy where you have Helping Hand and the other one that escapes from right in a second to bring back from the graveyard. You're milling them over, discarding them. And just kind of getting back a free 5/5 or a free X4 with their other creature. And then a bunch of different like one-ofs. So nothing too crazy there in the one-ofs list, but really crazy to see Esper Bounce be like the #1 deck played. Kind of showcases that people think this is a real deck and this is going to stick around. That being said, though, Gruul aggro did win to the surprise of no one. Nothing too fancy or crazy going on in this list. The major things that are kind of different in this is, we're seeing more removal spells getting played with, 3 Scorching Dragonfire here in the main. Outside of that, nothing too crazy. Pulpatch Recruit is starting to see its way back into the main deck. That card's kind of really well positioned right now when you have a bunch of like these bounce decks running around, and a bunch of like spot removal running around. Always good, just be able to pump up your creatures, and it's very easy to get its offspring off. For 3 mana, you get a 2/1 and a 1/1, and when they're both out on the field, it just makes removing creatures very annoying very quickly. Outside of that, nothing too crazy in the sideboard. The Lithomancer's Barrage is a new one, or not really a new one, but it's seeing more copies in the 75, just because we are getting some good weight creatures out there, or some bigger weight creatures going, and then we have like the tempo decks are coming out in full force, so being able to kill the Eddie Merc Crab, as well as being able to kill the I forget the other guy's name, the Tolarian Terror. Being able to kill both of those for 1 mana is just a good value, as they say. Moving on, there was this is one of the re-CQs that happened on Friday with down in Atlanta. There's no winners over here. There's a bunch of winners, obviously. This one was large enough where they had 8 people go 5-0. If you went 5-0, you qualified then for the next RZ. But just kind of breaking down the numbers is really what we're doing here. So this is not all the decks that participated in. This is the top 10 decks that were played. So we had Dimir midrange at 34 copies, Golgari midrange at 22, Domain at 19, Gruul aggro at 18, Esper Bounce at 13, Mono Red at 11, Bug Tempo, Sultai Tempo, whatever you want to call it, at 10, Azorius Tempo, that's the Oculus deck again, at 10, Jeskai Convoke at 10, and Caretaker's Talent at 9. So kind of our usual suspects. Esper Bounce again putting up 13 copies, not 19. 13 copies. Domain putting up 19 copies. Now that's very strange to me. I think it just kind of goes to show that Domain's a little bit more prevalent in paper than it is online. I'm not really sure what the why that is. There's always differences when you go to a paper tournament compared to an online tournament. It's always a little different, skewed and such. It's based off what people own, what people have access to is a little more. Usually in the big tournaments that doesn't really matter in the sense of like maybe in the first couple rounds, but people who want to play the best deck are gonna put the money, time, effort, whatever it takes to be able to play what they deem as the best deck. So, but Golgari midrange, Golgari midrange and Dimir midrange putting up the most copies though. No surprise with the Dimir. Dimir's kind of been deemed as quote unquote the best deck in the format. Whether that's true anymore, I'm not 100% sure. I think that even Dimir is changing slightly, and we'll get into that a little bit later. So, but Golgari putting up 22 copies, I think, is huge. I think Golgari is just not well positioned right now against all the bounce decks that are running around. Golgari doesn't play fast enough, and it doesn't really do enough to stop them. I say this as someone who is playing the bug tempo deck, and it doesn't feel strong enough. Every time I go against Golgari, it kind of just feels like a bye almost. It's a little wild how badly skewed that matchup is. But a lot of Dimir, a lot of Golgari, a lot of Domain. Weirdly enough, a lot of Gruul. 3 of those 4 make sense. Esper Bounce putting up 13. And 13 being registered isn't too crazy either. Like I said, that deck has kind of been popping off these last 2 weekends. Going on to the other Reseq that also happened, Dimir midrange putting up 32 copies that were registered. Golgari with 23, Esper Bounce with 17 this time, Mono Red with 15, Gruul Prowess with 15, Gruul Aggro with 14. If you want to know the difference between Gruul Aggro and Gruul Prowess, to me there is none. I kept looking at the different list, trying to find a difference on why they, what made these two different. Could not figure it out. So unfortunately, we only get, we get 10 copies, the 10 most played list, but really it's only 9. I think Gruul Prowess and Gruul Aggro are just the same deck. I'm not sure what the difference is. But then Caretakers with 13, Jeskai Convoke with 12, Domain with 11, and Azorius Tempo with 10. So, I mean, realistically, we had 29 Gruul Prowess Aggro decks, which is wild. It kind of showcases, and then 15 Mono Red showcases that, the red aggressive decks are still very much here. They're very prevalent still. They are doing a lot of damage still. They are very well represented in the meta. And if you were to combine all the, red aggressive decks together, they are definitely a bigger meta share than any other deck in the format. We always talk about Dimir midrange always being the biggest, but really if you were to combine all the red aggressive decks, they're usually bigger than that Dimir midrange. And they all kind of play out the same. Obviously, there's some subtle difference between Gruul, Mono Red, Boros, Boros Mice. There's a little difference between all of the flavors, but they're all trying to kill you as fast as they can. So nothing too crazy different there, but it is crazy, to see all these different decks being played. Kind of get a showcase of what the metagame is, if you will. That being said, we did have another standard challenge on Saturday. Again, Esper Bounce put up 8 copies, and Gruul Aggro with 6, Golgari with 4, Dimir with 4, Caretakers with 2, Domain with 2, and then a bunch of different 1-ofs in there. So not too crazy. Still wild to me that Esper Bounce is putting up more numbers now than Dimir. This is just wild to me to see Dimir take a back seat, essentially. Kind of crazy, to see Dimir taking a back seat to these other decks and what's going on with it. Not usually something we see, not something I've seen since I started doing, these metagame breakdowns. So showcases, Esper is here to stay. Esper is going to be putting up these numbers. You need to have a game plan for that deck. That being said, I don't think that deck is broken inherently. I don't think anything is crazy going on. I don't think there's anything you can't beat it, essentially. It's just, the new hotness as it is. And even, like I said, Dimir is changing as well into a bounce package too. And I'll go over that here in a little bit. That being said, though, the blue-red Oculus, or I'm sorry. That being said, though, there was a completely different deck that took down the tournament here. Is this blue, blue-white Omniscience deck. Took it down. Really a different kind of whole take on the whole thing. Really cool to see this, a new deck take down a tournament. A little crazy, a little surprising to see it taken down, but this is kind of the whole thing. Standard is always evolving, always changing, so it's not impossible to see a new strategy come out and do well. Obviously, this is not something anyone had on their bingo card. No one was expecting to see this. So it's nice to see, standards still continuing to evolve, continue to change, and we are still seeing, new decks emerge like this blue-white deck. I don't really have too much else to talk about it. It's just kind of one of those weird builds. It might have just been, someone got lucky, caught the metagame by surprise. Maybe this deck is here to stay. I'm not going to sit here and judge and say it is or isn't, but it is interesting to see as a whole. Like I said, new metagames approaching and coming out. Always fun to see. All right, going into the other standard challenge here. We had Dimir Midrange finally being back on top, putting 6 copies in. Then we had Mono Red at 5, Gruul Aggro at 4, Boros Aggro at 4, Azorius Tempo at 3, Golgari Midrange at 3, Esper Bounce at 2, Dimir Bounce at 2, and then a couple of different one-ofs. So Dimir putting its place back where it belongs, at the top. This was the second challenge that went on Saturday, so, I know they kind of overlap in those challenges, so it's not surprising to see Dimir Midrange make a comeback. Maybe, different people were playing in the second challenge. They wanted to play more Dimir, whatever happened. But, you can see aggro is still really the most prevalent here with, was that 13 copies of aggressive decks there in the top 4. So, Azorius Tempo still, popping back up. That deck has kind of like just died away, wasn't really doing anything, and now it's back. And I think it's back mainly because Golgari Midrange has been such on a downswing, and then Graveyard Hate is on a downswing because of it. Golgari kind of had the best Graveyard Hate next to Caretaker's Talent decks with the Rest in Peace. So without all this Graveyard Hate, it's easier to bring back our 5/5s and things like that, our Oculuses, and really take advantage of the board state, if you will. That being said, though, Mono White Caretakers did end up taking down this tournament. Nothing too surprising in this list as a whole. Ossification, I'm sure I'm butchering that word, is starting to see play in the main deck. It's a new removal spell that they're bringing in as a whole. Outside of that, nothing too crazy in this list. Regal, the Regal Karakor, the cat that makes more cats when it comes into play, is seeing playing the sideboard in this list. Kind of cool. Nothing too crazy there. Sarah Paragon started seeing play in the sideboards as well as a 1 or 2 of. These are just minor changes happening in the world of Mono White. And Demolition Field is going back into the deck, being able to hit the mainlands. Outside of that, though, nothing to write home about. Nothing too crazy. They are up to 4 Overlord of the Mistmoor. I don't know if you been keeping up with it or not. That is really there for the Dimir deck, being able to have those flyers to block their flyers type situation, being able to help pressure in against Kaido. I always forget his name. I don't know why. He's the most annoying thing I have to deal with most of the time. Being able to pressure in against Kaido, just things like that, is why that's being played. But outside of that, nothing too crazy. Still playing 4 Sunfall, still playing removal spells, Carrot Cakes, Caretaker's Talent. Nothing too wild. Always just, tweaking 1 and 2 O's here and there in this deck. Moving on, though, to the standard qualifier we also had on Saturday. We had 6 Gruul Aggro, 6 Esper Bounce, 3 of the Selesnya Cage decks, 2 Azorius Tempo decks, 2 Mono Red decks, 2 Dimir Bounce decks, 2 Bug Tempo decks, 2 Dimir Midrange decks, 2 Azorius Controls because those people hate themselves, and 4 other like 1-of decks in there. So Esper Cage. Selesnya Cage making a kind of a breakout thing. We saw Doomwake playing that to a perfect 9-0 finish on day 1. Kind of fell off in the back half. I think he ended up top 32ing still, but did not get into the top 8 with it. But had a fantastic run day 1. Selesnya Cage kind of proved that it is here to come out and play. Now, whether that deck is here to stay or if this was just a flash in the pan for this weekend, or past weekend, we'll find out. But interesting to see that, popping up. Again, Gruul Aggro and Esper Bounce putting 6 copies in, and Dimir Midrange only putting 2, along with 2 of the Dimir Bounce, which I promise we will get to. But, not too crazy. Aggro putting it the most copies, but Esper Bounce still showcasing that it is here. It is going to be played. People are trying this out. They keep changing up the list. We've seen a bunch of different iterations of Esper Bounce. There is, much like Dimir Midrange, there's no one main copy, one way to figure out how to play it. We are seeing quite a bit of different builds going on with that. That being said, though, the Blue White's Oculus deck did win, or Blue White Tempo, I believe is what it's being called, did win. So nice to see, that doing well as a whole. Kind of like coming out of retirement almost, We haven't really seen this deck do well in quite a long time. Just a quick rundown if you guys don't remember how this deck works. Your whole goal is to essentially either mill over or discard either a Oculus or a Haughty Djinn, and then buy it back with Helping Hand for 1 mana or Recommission for 2 mana. Recommission lets it come back into play untapped with a +1/+1 counter, and Helping Hand lets it come back from the battlefield tapped. So, little trade-offs there. You get to play a Split Up as a good board wipe for your deck, and then just a bunch of different ways to mill and buy time with either Soul Partition or Unsummon as kind of like your pseudo removal spells, if you will. We had the standard challenge on Sunday here. 6 Esper bounces yet again, 4 Dimir bounces, 4 Azorius Tempo, 3 Mono Red, 3 Boros Aggro, 2 Caretakers, 2 Domain, 2 Selesnya Aggro, and then a couple different 1-ups. So, once again, Esper Bounces keeps putting up all these numbers. They're not winning any of these tournaments, but they are putting up quite a bit of numbers in them in the top 32. So, nice to see Dimir Bounce still putting up numbers, which is kind of the new iteration of Dimir. And then, Azorius Tempo, we just saw that. Putting up numbers coming kind of out of retirement, like I was saying. Just cool to see. That being said, Azorius Oculus did win again. So, kind of crazy to see this deck, essentially come out of retirement this weekend, start putting up numbers, start doing some things. This one running 1 main negate, a little different than what we were seeing, in the other one. Just, overall, nothing too crazy. Starting to realize that they can play Fairy Mastermind in the sideboard. Just a good value card. Happy to see they kind of realize that this is a good card to play. Not really sure why the deck never picked that up in the first place, but happy to see that it's doing well. I really like this deck as a whole. It's really fun for me. It is a deck that I think is really good, but terrible if you're going to run into a lot of graveyard hate. You can never cast your spells, basically, or you can cast them, but they're never doing anything. All right. Getting into the Spotlight series. So this was the day 1 archetype breakdown. We had, what was it? 1,400, almost 1,500 players came out to the Spotlight series, definitely feeling like a GP of old. So really fun to see, those kind of events are coming back. Really happy for this event. I really wish I could have made it down there, but unfortunately, timing and everything didn't work out for me. But Dimir Midrange was the most played deck at 14%, followed right by Gruul Aggro with 14% as well. Obviously, they're doing a little bit of rounding there with 210 and 205. So 2 most played archetypes. I don't think anyone's surprised by that. Really, this is kind of what we all kind of expected. I expected Dimir Midrange to be the most played deck, and then one of the red aggressive decks to be played the most right after it or tied for it. So I figured either Gruul, Mono Red, Boros, one of those versions was going to kind of take over as a whole. So not surprising there in any way or regard. Golgari Midrange, for some reason, still putting up the 3rd most with 124, 9%. So a little surprising to see that as a whole. I don't think Golgari Midrange is well positioned as a whole. So kind of surprising. Domain with 6%. A little weird too. Again, I don't think Domain is super favorite. I think with all the red aggressive decks being able to go under Domain, that is a big deal. That being said, Domain never gets to get up to 5 mana though, and slam Zur and activate on the same turn. That can be lights out against the red aggressive decks. Mono White Tokens at 5%, being the 5th most played deck, I think is correct. I kind of called this on the podcast I do with Crawdaddy 23 or Dakota, depending on if you know who he is or not. We do a podcast every Saturday it comes out. But we were talking about, going into the Spotlight series, what we expect to see, and I said that Mono White Tokens was going to be well positioned in this tournament. I think moving forward, we had a lot of, it's good against the red aggressive decks. It can put up a game against almost any deck in the format. I thought Mono White Tokens or Caretaker's Talent was going to be, a very good player in this game as a whole come this weekend. And then Esper Pixies putting up 5%. Again, not too surprising. I thought it would be a lot higher, really. I thought it was going to have a a bigger meta share on day one because it's been the new hotness overall. And then, Azorius Oculus having 3% or 44 copies is still a little surprising because, like I said, that deck has basically fallen off the board. No one really talked about it or anything for the last couple months. So kind of happy to see that deck come back as well. That being said, when we go into day two, so this is what the decks, what day two metagame looked like. Dimir still with number one, still rule aggro at number one as well. 62, 61 copies. Nothing too crazy. Esper's Pixies with 10%, moving up in the metagame. Domain 8%, mono white 5%, keeping the same aggressive or same meta share. Sorry, not aggressive. Mono red aggro then after that with 5%, and Golgari mid range with 5%. So we can kind of see as these, when we go back to what we had before, we can kind of see Golgari dropped off, Domain went up, Esper Pixies went up by a lot. Mono white tokens, where are you? Say the same, 5% as well. So a couple different decks moved up a little bit more than we expected. A lot of decks stayed the same. Not too surprising, Dimir and Gruul stayed the same, keeping the top meta share of the tournament. How many copies we had going in on day one, not too surprising. I think just by numbers, they should have kind of kept the same kind of top seeds basically. But Esper Pixie, that's the Esper like bounce deck. Definitely moved up a lot. Going from fifth or sixth to number 3. Super interesting to see that deck actually put up numbers, kind of proving that it is a viable deck in this format. That being said, going into the top 8, I think this was my biggest surprise, was seeing Oculus do well. And if you notice, this is kind of a different build than what we saw from the other decks. We were playing one Korra in the main. She's kind of was like hailed as like a good card being played in these lists. Running only 3 helping hand and 2 recommissions. Usually it's like 4 and 3. A little different there, and playing this Phantom Interface as well instead of the enchantment that they normally play. Eli has come out on Twitter and he talked about his deck choice and his numbers a little bit. He had talked about the fact that he wanted the Phantom Interference because it gave him an option against the board wipes in the main deck on game ones, and just kind of helped him out, and you got to play more than at sorcery speed because you were able to hold up Phantom Interference. Your opponent doesn't do anything. You get to play Moment of Truth or Picklock Prankster instead. He also said that there should be 4 helping hand in the deck. He couldn't find the 4th copy. He said he would cut a soul partition to put the 4th one in. He was even cracking packs to try to find that card. So if you want to take this to your next RCQ, I suggest going up to 4 helping hands in the main deck. Hopefully you can find them, unlike him. But obviously he couldn't find them, still did really well. We're seeing the Monastery Mentor in the sideboard as well, which is usually what they used to have as like their pivot plan. Overall, I just think it's a really interesting deck. I think it's really well positioned as a whole. I think it's cool to see it come back into the metagame. This is a deck I really liked playing, and I basically stopped playing it after I played like 2 leagues, and I think I won 2 games. I was like, all right, maybe we don't take this to the tournaments. Maybe we don't take this to our RCQs. But really cool to see this deck get into the top 8. Really happy for Eli, and really happy that we could see this deck kind of showcase and have a breakout weekend. between the challenges and such happening on Magic Online and the Spotlight. And the Spotlight tournament, getting into the top 8 kind of showcases this deck is not dead, and maybe you should have some more graveyard hate going into your next RCQ that you're going to be playing at. So this is the Dimir Bounce deck, or Dimir Enchantments is what they were calling it at the SCG Con. But this is the Dimir Bounce, essentially. So this is not a fixed deck. Obviously, there's still a lot of different numbers being figured out. But this is the one that got a top 8 in the Spotlight Challenge. So I'm very interested to talk about this and kind of go over it and just kind of what they're doing. Essentially, is we've gone to a more low to the ground Dimir deck, where we get to have Helpless Nightmare, Nowhere to Run, and Storm Chaser's Talent is kind of our value bounce spells. So Hopeless Nightmare, letting our opponent or making our opponent discard a card, lose 2 life, kind of gives the Dimir deck a little bit of reach as well with that 2 life loss. Nowhere to run, just a good removal spell to continuously keep bouncing back essentially. We're still running 1 Ghost for a Throw and 2 Cut Down in the main as well. And then this Town Ain't Big Enough and Fear of Isolation are our 2 ways to bounce our spell or bounce our permanents essentially. So we have Nowhere to Run, Hopeless Nightmare, Stormchaser's Talent, and even Floodpit's Drowner is kind of like our bounce things or things we would like to bounce essentially. And this town ain't big enough, and the Fear of Isolation is our way to do it. Notably, Fear of Isolation, if it was to get countered as part of its cost to cast this, you have to return a permanent, so you can't ever stop that interaction from happening. Not that there's a lot of counter spells running around, but just for your guys's so you guys are aware of how that card works essentially. And of course, we've seen this town ain't big enough just be a very good value card as a whole. We're still playing, Curiosity, Kaido, being able to get our good card advantage that way. And we're just playing then, this low to the ground removal or low to the ground value package essentially. And I think this might be where Dimir is going to move forward, in the future. I could be wrong. Dimir midrange could still be the #1 deck to play, or still be the correct Dimir deck to play. But I think this is where we're going to see Dimir move towards the future, or at least for the next little bit. And I think this is what you need to be prepared for when you go into your RCQs. What you're going to be seeing, what you need to know about them essentially. Now, obviously, it's going to be hard to know what version you're going to be playing against until they play either one of the either they play like a Stormchaser's Talent, a Hopeless Nightmare, or a Fear of Isolation, because all the other cards are kind of like what's already played in the deck. So be interesting to see if this is what happens and this is the new Dimir, or if this is just a flash in the pan and the Esper Bounce is going to be the go-to bounce deck, or something else entirely. That being said, though, Nicholas Oldenheimer was the person who took down the tournament as a whole. He is the one to win the first Spotlight Series or Spotlight Challenge ever. Playing an interesting take on the Gruul deck. He went on a more like all-in Gruul strategy. Notably, he's back on the Ley Lines. That is a card that has kind of been out of these decks for a while now, and he went full circle, came back to the Ley Lines, even playing Carousel Sword. So he's running Scamp and Heartfire Hero as his 1-drops of choice to go along with Leyline and Regency. So Scamp, in case you guys don't know, when it deals combat damage to a player, you may sacrifice it if you do proliferate, and then when it dies, it deals damage equal to its power to any target, just like Heartfire Hero. So being able to have a way to sacrifice it. Obviously, we can get it pumped up with Monstrous Rage. We're playing Snakeskin Veil. We're playing Turn Inside Out. We're playing Overprotect. Bunch more pump spells than what we're normally used to seeing in these Gruul decks. We're also playing Slickshot Show Off, giving you more of an all-in kind of strategy. And of course, we're playing Questing Druid to kind of dig through our deck as well. No Screaming Nemesis in the main, only 2 in the sideboard. Definitely different to see. And then had the 4 Paul Patch Recruit in the sideboard. I really like seeing that. Just kind of a different take on the deck as a whole, and really interesting kind of going all-in strategy. I think this is probably a good strategy if you expect there to be a lot less Golgari running around the green-black decks. They're usually the ones that play a lot of removal and can really slow this kind of deck down. And Dimir can't hold up removal all the time while still trying to advance its board state. So I really think it's an interesting take, and I'm happy for Nicholas. I'm glad he was able to take down the entire tournament, and it's a cool version. It's an all-in Gruul aggro that I didn't think was around anymore, and I'm sure a lot of people didn't expect to be just killed on turn 1 essentially. If your opponent reveals Leyline on turn 0, goes turn 1, Heartfire Hero, you are under a clock immediately, and it just makes all your interaction more relevant. You have to have the removal spells quick and fast and plentiful. So, I applaud him. I think it's a great job of what he did. And I think it kind of showcases that Standard is, not solved by any means. We're seeing new decks continuously pop up. We're seeing old ones come back, like the Oculus deck having a big breakout weekend. This weekend, putting up a lot of numbers in the challenges, as well as, winning a couple of them. Also putting up a top 8 in the Spotlight Series. Just wild to kind of see happen. So excited to see what keeps going on in this standard season, what kind of keeps developing. You know, we have a new set coming out here in February, so really excited to see what all happens with the format. As always, guys, if you like what you're seeing, you like what I'm doing, go ahead and leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, it really helps me out. And let me know down below what you're playing in Standard, what you guys are getting ready for in your RCs, if you're going to one for the Modern format. Love to hear from you guys, and I'll catch you guys next time.